An important component of the drug testing process is the review and verification of a drug test result by a medical review officer or an MRO. Next up, I have Tom Fulmer going to be interviewing me and talking about the important role in drug testing of the medical review officer.
I'm Tom Fulmer, and joining us is Mr. Joe Riley to talk about some of the things related to MRO, or Medical Review Officer Services. He's agreed to answer some questions for us, so welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here and talk about the medical review officer, or what we often call the MRO, as you know.
Absolutely, and that's something that comes up in a lot of different parts of drug testing. Can you give us just kind of a quick summary? What does a MRO actually do?
Sure, and a lot of folks maybe never heard of an MRO or maybe never heard of a medical review officer. And the MRO is an important component of the drug testing process for employment drug testing, primarily. And in employment drug testing, we have DOT regulated drug testing, which is highly regulated. Right. And then we have non-DOT, which is folks that are not in the transportation regulated industry. But really what the MRO is a gatekeeper protecting the rights of the employer and the employee, and kind of checking out that we've got a valid drug test result and there's no false positive, and also ruling out any prescribed medications that the individual that was tested may have been on. So there's a process with that.
Well, excellent. And so the MRO falls into play after the collection's done. It's sent to the lab, and the lab's going to send that to the medical review officer. So when they get that, obviously, if it's a negative result, tell me what the MRO does for that. Then also, what does the MRO do if it's a non-negative or confirmed positive result at that point? What are the two different processes?
Two great questions, and I'll start with what happens if it's a negative. So the function of the MRO with a negative drug test result is to just kind of look over the paperwork, or all the I's dotted, the T's crossed, the donor signed the form, didn't sign the form, the collector signed the form. Do we have chain of custody? Is this specimen belong to this donor? And they kind of sign off on that result that everything looks good. Now, there are MRO operations, full-time MRO businesses that have a lot of that process automated, where a computer system is doing those checks and balances, and as long as there's no exceptions, nothing looks wrong, the computer system is automatically reporting out that negative result, which means if you have a professional medical review officer service with the right software and electronic capabilities, you can get those negative results, within hours, if not within minutes of when the laboratory reported that negative result. So now with the non-negatives or the positives, this is where the MRO's work really kicks in. So every time the MRO gets a positive, they call the donor that gave the specimen. And I'll kind of role play with you, Tom, and say,
sure,
I'm Dr. Joe, and I'm not really an MRO, but I'll play an MRO for a minute. Hello, Tom.
Yeah,
how are you today?
Tom. I'm doing all right.
Well, this is Dr. Joe. I'm the MRO for your company that just did a drug test on you. I want to verify your social security number, your date of birth. I want to make sure you're the right person who I'm talking to. So I kind of go through that process. I go through a little Miranda that tells you that this is a confidential conversation, because we may talk about some medications that you're on. And then I tell you, Tom, you tested positive on your drug test 2 days ago for opiates.
And I'm going to say, no way.
No way, yeah. But in this case, specifically codeine. So Tom, is there any medical explanation that you have codeine in your system?
Well, I did go to the doctor, and they gave me a prescription, something for the other day.
Okay, well that's exactly what I as an MRO do, Tom, is I'm going to verify that. So I'm going to need from you the name of your pharmacy and their phone number, and I'm going to need your prescription number. And I'm going to verify that you in fact have a prescription for codeine. And if you do, I'm going to report your drug test result to your employer as a negative, because you have a legitimate medical explanation for why codeine was in your body, a legal, legitimate medical explanation. And your employer doesn't necessarily need to know about this conversation, okay? Because the medicines you take is your private confidential information. Now, if you had told me If I had gotten the result back and it was positive for marijuana or positive for cocaine, there's not really any medical explanation for that in a DOT drug test. DOT drug testing does not recognize medical or recreational marijuana, and obviously there aren't any legal medications being prescribed today for cocaine. And Coca-Cola no longer has cocaine in it like it did 100 years ago. So that's kind of what the MRO does, is they kind of check out the drug test result, they make sure it's right, and then they report it to the employer.
Okay. And so what happens if there's something like you mentioned, the DOT, and they have very specific requirements? What happens if there's some kind of concern about something? So they have a legal prescription, but maybe there's some kind of concern about that. Does the MRO get involved in that process at all?
Yeah, so with DOT testing, we're dealing with truck drivers and we're dealing with airline pilots and boat captains. And so they may have a legitimate prescription for hydromorphone, Percocet. And there may be a safety concern that this person's flying a plane or driving a truck and at the same time taking Percocet or hydromorphone. So in the professional opinion of the medical review officer, who is a licensed physician, by the way, and has been trained very thoroughly in these drugs and how they affect people, that medical review officer may alert the employer that he has a safety concern because of the use of a prescribed medication. Now the employer has an obligation to make sure that employee is fit for duty. And that may require that employee going to see the physician that prescribed the medication and that physician signing off that this employee is fit for duty to fly that airplane or to drive that truck. So there is a built-in mechanism to deal with those safety concerns.
Gotcha. And that makes a lot of sense, to being that resource to that employer. So are there any situations where a medical review officer is required, or maybe where one's not required?
Well, in DOT drug testing, by regulation, the MRO has to be part of the drug testing process. For non-DOT workplace drug testing, in many states, an MRO is also required, because also in many states, the requirements are to follow the DOT regulations. There are some states that have laws that don't address the MRO, but certainly the use of an MRO in the employment drug testing process protects the employer and it minimizes their risks in the drug testing process. And if they don't have an MRO, their risk is escalated, because now potentially HR managers or HR generalists may be asking people about prescribed drugs and making decisions about prescribed drugs, which they're not qualified to make those decisions, and they really don't have the rights to ask people about their medications because of HIPAA laws and American Disabilities Act, and they could be getting themselves in hot water.
Yeah, that can definitely be some challenges. I can see that it plays, a big part in the drug testing process, and the integrity of the process, the quality control, as well as the verification portions of that.
And one other point, a lot of folks today might be using for pre-employment purpose what we call instant drug testing. So instant drug testing could be done at your place of business. It could also be done at a local drug testing center, where the urine is collected in a cup that actually does an initial screening of the urine to determine negative or non-negative. In those cases, the negatives are reliable and can be reported, okay? And so there's not necessarily an MRO involved there, because it's an instant read and automatically reported. But if that instant test is non-negative, it most certainly must go to the laboratory for confirmation testing and then review and verification by a medical review officer.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you sharing that information. Or any other thoughts or comments that you had that you think are important related to the medical review officer in the drug testing process?
Yeah, good question, Tom. So coming down the pike, okay, what's in the future? The role of the MRO is going to increase next year, starting January 6th of 2020, for employers that are regulated by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And that includes truck drivers and bus drivers. So the FMCSA is in the process of developing what's called a clearinghouse. And the clearinghouse is going to be a national database of people who had tested positive. Because if you test positive as a truck driver, you need to be removed from that safety sensitive position until you go through a rehabilitation program. So this database is going to track folks that had a positive and track folks that have either completed or not completed that rehabilitation process, which is provided by what we call a substance abuse professional. So starting in January of 2020, the MRO is going to have to report for DOT testing. This is FMCSA regulated testing. They're going to have to report positives and refusals up into that FMCSA clearinghouse database. So this is going to put, extra work onto the MRO. I think a lot of single MROs might get out of the MRO business. But there are, fortunately, some larger MRO organizations that have multiple doctors, that have electronic capabilities, that are putting together systems to be able to do this reporting.
And I think that's going to be a key thing with that is the systemization of it. I think you're right. It's going to be a hard time for just one individual to be able to manage that. And I know there's a lot more information coming out about that down the road with some of the details that we'll be reporting on in the future.
Absolutely. And we'll be doing another video specifically on the FMCSA clearinghouse as we get more information and we get accurate information,
right,
and we can, intelligently discuss how it's going to work and then provide that type of service out there to the trucking and the bus industry.
All right, Joe, thanks for joining us and sharing your expertise and knowledge on the MRO process. It's very, very helpful, and I'm sure we'll have some more information coming up with you on the clearinghouse video, as well as all of our other videos on our YouTube channel. And make sure you subscribe to get updates on all the videos that we have coming out. I know we have quite a few that are be coming out here soon. And you can find a lot of great information on our blog at the National Drug Screening blog at nationaldrugscreening.com. Just click on blog. There's a great search tool for anything you want to know about drug and alcohol testing and anything coming up as far as trends in the industry. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next video.